occupational outcomes of the fathers and son, and or say income levels of fathers and son. And this has been another strand of literature which doesn't look at the group level, but it looks at individuals and then later tries to relate it to caste. So I'm going to focus more on mobility, both in some ways, like thinking about the individual and the person, the whole jati as a whole. But I'm not going to use intra-generational or intergenerational mobility, but what I'm going to do is understand age cohort based analysis. And I will also tell why I'm using a age cohort based analysis rather than an intergenerational analysis in the course. So, in terms of studies that look at the economic studies on social mobility, as I mentioned, they look at what is happening to the son in relation to father, and that has been the typical mode of study. And for that, the data sources that are used are this National Election Survey, which is collected by CSDS. There are few studies based on that. There are some studies on employment, unemployment surveys of the NSSO, and there are studies from Indian Human Development Survey, which were conducted in 2004, 5, and 11, 12. I think Libitha study primarily uses this data. But one of the shortfall of many of these data sources is that the data is at caste group level. So we may know whether the individual belongs to SC, ST, OBC or others, but we may not know the jati level. IHDS has this thing in some parts, but it is there are a lot of issues with that. But yeah, nowadays with this AI and all, cleaning has got easier. So maybe using IHDS data may be simpler. Then there is this current data that I'll be mentioning, that is the consumer pyramid household survey data. Population census data is also there, and there are some primary surveys that were collected and which has jati level data. So because on the ground, jati is the more accurate thing of what people relate to, and so having jati level information and looking at mobility at jati level seems to be a bit more appropriate approach. And if you look at recent studies, many economists have suddenly started using jati level data, and starting from 22, and with Bihar census data, caste census data available, many people have started using jati level information for understanding socioeconomic inequalities and mobility. So um, this is the study that is the reason. So I'm going to use the social mobility using a particular data source which has jati level information. Now, this context of Tamil Nadu, why is it important in Tamil Nadu, or what is it that makes this study relevant in Tamil Nadu? Is that Tamil Nadu is seen as a state which is advanced in is Louisian transition or structural transformation, where people seem to have a lot more people than a lot more proportion of people have moved out of agriculture in Tamil Nadu compared to other states. And in that sense, some of the village studies, they seem to be calling this state has become a post-agrarian state. And many of the cultivating caste and cultivating non-cultivating caste and some cultivating upper caste have seemed to have moved out of villages. So there is this. So in that sense, again, if lesser agriculture is there, there may be much higher mobility across the asset poor classes of old. The other thing is that the state also has a long history of anti-caste movements, and pioneered by Ayodhya Das and other Dalit pioneers who were involved in anti-caste struggles. And there was this strand of Tamil Buddhism they are the ones who framed this term called as Dravidian. And then later, non-Brahmin movement comes up, which kind of takes up this and becomes something called as Justice Party. And then after a while, it becomes the Dravidian movement of Periyar. And then later, very diluted Dravidian movement, but say DMK and ADMK parties which have with a focus on welfareism. And this history of these anti-caste movements with all these gradations, not everyone is equally anti-caste and has been studied much in detail. The other thing that makes Tamil Nadu interesting is that there is a long history of affirmative action. Reservations for non-Brahmins started as early as 1921, more than 100 years ago. So again, so you have people less dependent on agriculture, a history of anti-caste movement, history of affirmative action. You again expect that there may be much more mobility for Dalits in this state. And the other, but the problematic trends recent maybe last few years is also that the political parties, they do assert their own caste prides, and they also last few decades have been about caste patronage to intermediate caste by Dravidian parties. So we kind of see particularly problematic things happening to Dalits, and this happens with some kind of caste patronage from the political parties, and this may have some kind of negative impacts on mobility. That is also a possibility, but in general, we would expect that the state to have somewhat better outcomes for Dalits compared to other states. So the and also this debate of what is this social justice that the state keeps talking about. There is debates on what has actually been the progress, and is it just a rhetoric, and that is also a concern. One other thing specific to Dalit movements is that in this and also to look at different jatis is that Dalit assertion pronounced since 1990s, that is something that has been documented. And one thing that is varied in the Dalit movements in Tamil Nadu is that each of the jatis have taken somewhat different trajectories, because geographically the Dalit jatis are segregated in different regions of the state, or say aggregated in different regions of the state. They have also mobilized differently, and they have also emerged with different strategies. So it is important to know whether all those strategies have worked better, or what has been happening because of the strategy. So there is at one level all the Dalits having different strategies. Also the across geography, the the intermediate castes also vary, and their political mobilization has also varied across these regions. So mobility of Dalits is going to depend on how well they are organized, and also how well the intermediate parties in those geographies are organized, and how these interactions happen. One other thing that is critical to this region is also that this state was the first to subclassify OBCs and Dalits. So backward classes were classified as most backward classes and backward classes, and some scheduled castes were also categorized as scheduled caste and scheduled caste A in 2010, long before the current debates on subclassification has emerged. So again, this makes it important to look at not just overall Dalits as a whole, but look at jatis within Dalits and how their mobility has been. So after the long kind of context setting, so this is what I am going to look at. So how large are the gaps in educational and occupational attainment between Dalits and non-Dalits in Tamil Nadu? Have these gaps narrowed in recent years, and what is the pattern of relative mobility among Dalits in the state? What is the degree of variation in educational and occupational attainment across Dalit subcaste in Tamil Nadu? How pronounced are the differences of three broad Dalit groups, which are Arundhatiyars, Devendra Kula Velalas, and Adi Dravidas, and non-Dalits? So, what are their each of them? If we look at non-Dalits, how do they compare in their outcomes with non-Dalits? And other thing why I'm looking at this age cohort is that most of the intergenerational studies focus only on the men, because once you go to father son, Then once you go to household data, within household you always have father and son. The women in the household, their parents may not be staying in the house if they are married women. So they are not going to stay in the house. So there is going to be very less mother-daughter or father-daughter pairs, which makes when we do intergenerational mobility, we get very less idea of how has women's status changed. So this idea of using age cohorts allows me to look at not just changes across age cohort for men, but also changes across age cohort for women. So this is why I am taking this route of age cohorts so that I can answer this particular question. What trends appear over time in Dalit women's status in Tamil Nadu? Are younger Dalit women showing higher rates of being out of paid work compared to older generation? This is something some of the village studies have told. So we want to look at whether that is the case in this particular context. So as I mentioned, I'm going to use the Consumer Pyramid Household Survey data, which was collected by Center for Monitoring Indian Economy in 2014. It collects data every year, and I think there is data up to 2024. But the 2014 data has a lot more data points than other years, so I'm using that. There is no reason that 2014 is the best thing to be doing. So it's a large scale data which collects information on various aspects about 2 lakh households. So I'm going to look at dissimilarity indices across younger and older cohorts and test the extent of relative social mobility. As I mentioned, these father-son or mother-daughter pairs means that because there are more nuclear households, we are going to have even father-son pairs are less, and then mother-daughter pairs are going to be much lesser. So that's why I'm going to use age cohort-based analysis. This CPIE is a longitudinal data, and it is collected in 3 waves in a year and collects information on various parameters: consumption, unemployment, aspirations, and assets. There are 4 modules in this data, like the aspirational India data, which asks them what are the things they aspire to buy. And then there is a consumption expenditure data, which estimates the consumption. And then there's monthly income data. And then there is this module called as People of India data. This is the data that I'm going to use. This data has information related to Jati level identity of the individuals, approximately 1,70,000 households in India, about 9,500 households in Tamil Nadu. So before we proceed, there is this concerns related to data. There are issues regarding this data being more urban biased. So whatever we find, we have to take it with a bit of caveat. But still, there is no such very few large scale data with such information. So yeah, so I said 9,000, sorry, it's 8,500 households in Tamil Nadu, and there are 40,000 individuals surveyed. In 2014, 36,000 had given responses. They were not, the others did not respond to the question. So this is the data I'm going to use. So what I did was that in this cohort, so I wanted to look at 18 to 65-year-olds and think of, so 18 to 65-year-olds, and I divided them into 3 equal age cohorts. So say 18 to 33, 34 to 49, and 50 to 65. So what I'm trying to say is, say if we take the 50 to 65-year-olds and look at the difference between Dalits and non-Dalits in that age cohort, we should expect that the younger, the middle age cohort, which will be say 34 to 49, they will have much lesser differences, and then the 18 to 33 to have much lower difference, because the actual achievements are not indicators of mobility. The indicators of mobility is how is the gap between scheduled caste and non-scheduled caste happening. Are Dalits and non-Dalits becoming more and more similar? If they are becoming more and more dissimilar, then there is some kind of downward mobility. But if they are not becoming so much more similar, then then the differences seem to persist. So this is the broad idea I'm going to use. So what I have done is divided this 18 to 65-year-old, as I mentioned, into three age cohorts. The youngest cohort, the average age is 25 years, and then the older ones are the 40-year-olds, average 41 years, and then this 50 to 65, the average is 57-year-old. So the overall population is about 38-year-old, but we are using these three different cohorts, and across these cohorts, I find the scheduled caste to be 28, 27, and 24. The census says scheduled caste to be around 18, 19%. So this seems to be slightly higher in this survey. And so one good thing is that we have categories within. I'll mention how these three categories are formed at a later stage. But so these Arundhatiyars, the most backward Dalits in terms of typical economic outcomes, and they comprise about 13 to 14 to 15%. The Devendra Kulavelalar, who are in the concentrated more in the southern Tamil Nadu, and who have faced a lot of violence from the Devar caste, and have also got some kind of mobility through certain political parties. They comprise about 15 to 16%. The Adi Dravidar is the largest Dalit group, and they are more concentrated in the north of Tamil Nadu, but they are spread all over Tamil Nadu, and they had taken a certain different kind of political route, and that compared to others, and they comprise about 70% of the whole Dalit population in Tamil Nadu. All the other Dalits put together, they comprise about 1 to 1.5% in this sample. So I'm not using their information for now. It's a very small sample, so I'm not using them. And then scheduled tribes form only 0.5% or so in the sample, so I'm not using scheduled tribe data also in this analysis. So beyond the scheduled caste, most backward classes, they form about 15 to 16%. The backward classes form about 40%. The other castes, other than SC, ST, most backward classes and backward classes, they form about 5 to 7% in these different age cohorts. The household size is about 4.5 people in each of these households. Urban population share is about 50%. And in some ways, because we don't cover the people younger than 18, more than 65, because more than 65 will be out of the workforce. Younger than 18 may not have higher levels of education. If you want to compare 12th standard and above, it is better we consider at least 18-year-olds. So this is like out of a population weight of 7.5 crores. This is somewhat weighted population is about 5 crore, 5.23 crores. That is the population for which we can base our analysis. So what do we see as overall Tamil Nadu between the older age to the middle age? So when I say older age, from now on, older age means 50 to 65, and middle age is 34 to 49. So you can say, compared to the 50 to 65-year-olds, what has happened to the middle age group? So what we observe is that the progress was not so great in terms of education across these groups. So if we say 50 to 65, there were 33% who were illiterate. The 34 to 49, there was 24% who were illiterate. No big difference in the primary or less than primary level. Some difference in the primary, less than middle, and then some small differences in all other levels. There is some significant difference when it comes to higher secondary and above. So, but overall, the transition from those who are 50 to 65 to 34 to 49 in education seem to have been slow. So the dissimilarity index, which is basically telling us that what is the proportion I have to reallocate in a single group to make both the groups similar. So if at all typically we consider it to be high if it is beyond 15 or beyond 20. Beyond 20 is considered very high, but otherwise there is some levels of dissimilarity. So what we observe is that there is some small change that has happened between the older and the middle age cohort. Now, when we look at transition from this 34 to 49 to 18 to 33, here we see enormous levels of transition. So from 24% who were illiterate in the 34 to 49 years group, that had come down to 3.6%. And then schooling less than primary, there is no big difference. But at all other levels, you see big differences. And the higher secondary and above is the highest, like about 40% people in 2014 in Tamil Nadu had at least completed 12th standard. So, which is a significant high numbers. And now we can see with the dissimilarity index that the younger cohort is very, very different from the middle age cohort, whereas the middle age cohort was not so different from the old age cohort. And that is something that is happening to education across these three age cohorts. This is about what happened to these three age cohorts. Now I want to look at what was the difference between Dalits and non-Dalits in all of these three age cohorts. So when we look at so what I'm showing here is these are the education levels in the older age cohort, that is 50 to 65-year-old, and this blue is Dalits and the orange one is the non-Dalits, and we are looking at differences between the two, and what we find is that there were significant differences. That is, whereas non-SCs, non-Dalits had only 27% illiterate, the 51% of the Dalits in that age group were illiterate. And the predominantly this 23% seems to be the major dissimilarity that is happening with the older age cohort. Then if we look into the middle age cohort, again what we see is that these differences persist and it's not come down drastically, though we see lesser illiterate population, but still we see much higher Dalit population which is illiterate compared to the non-Dalit population. And this is from 23.8, it comes down only to 21.9. So this is that. So this first transition in the state is that there is first level, there is not much difference in education, but also what is interesting is that these differences between Dalit and non-Dalit has not moved away till this particular age group. So then we look at, I have just reproduced the middle age group here, and then I'm putting this younger. So this should be middle age and this should be younger age. And once we do that, as I mentioned, the younger age group had seen a tremendous increase in education. But now we are looking at differences between education, difference in education attainment between Dalits and non-Dalits. So what we observe is that one thing that has positively happened is that the proportion of illiterate, when it came down, it has come down drastically for Dalits also, right? So even the illiterate percentage is only 6.4% among Dalits in Tamil Nadu, whereas it's only 2% for non-Dalit in Tamil Nadu. But still we see reasonably high dissimilarity index, and this dissimilarity now seems to come from higher secondary and above category, right? So what we see is that the gains in higher secondary, whatever gains happen to the non-Dalits, is much higher than the gains to the Dalits. So the dissimilarity previously, whereas the focus in the older age group was about getting literate, for the younger Dalits, the struggle or the relatively less chance is about getting higher secondary and above education. And it is also this, we should be aware that these are also not telling us about quality of education and the kind of institutions these students are studying, which may be making these differences even more pronounced. So what we observe is that across these age groups, in terms of education, there is still wide disparities between Dalits and non-Dalits. Previously, whereas these disparities were about not getting educated, Now those disparities have come down, but now the existing disparities in the state seems to be about getting higher secondary education and above. Now, again, I wanted to look at men and women separately, and what we find is that somewhat similar trends when it comes to higher secondary. The difference in for men is about 14%, and difference for women is about 13%. And then you see that about 47% of men have degrees, but higher secondary and above, whereas 41% women have. And similar differences we see for Dalit men and women. Only one thing that is kind of concerning is that is this high illiterate levels by relative standards of Dalit women, and that is something that is somewhat still a concern with the with this information. Uh, so this is at a overall SC level, but this data allows us to look at within SCs what is happening to the different caste groups. So to explore that, um, so if we were to think of jatis within SCs, the census 1991 census, when we looked at it, mentions that about 20% of the 19% of the population was Dalits, about 1 crore at that time of a 5 crore population. And this had about 76 jatis, and with population ranging from 59 individuals in one group to 52 lakh individuals in one group. And so if we took 18 jatis, which formed uh, which were like synonymous to each other, like sometimes they call themselves as Adi Dravida or Paraya or Sambhavar, and say some of the groups call, say, Devendra Kulatan, which is a larger name for Pallan, Pannadi, Kadayan, Kalladi, Kudupan, and Vatirian. So what we find is that this 97.7%, where 63% is Adi Dravidas, 18.8% is Devendra Velalar, and 16% is Arundhatiyar. So our sample also within Dalits, we get roughly this proportion. And but we don't have all these 76 jatis. In the study, what we find is about 10 jatis. That is Adi Andhra, Adi Dravida, Arundhatiyar, Chakkiliyan, Pallan, Parayan, Paravar, Pulayan, Totti, Varna. So these jatis, we are again combining it to three groups, three larger groups. That is Adi Dravidar, Devendra Kulavelata, Velalar, and Arundhatiyar. And these are the, again, I have not done the jati level analysis for MBCs, BCs, and others, but this is the information that is available in the data. And one of the things with these data sources is that obviously if we go at jati level representation, we are going to find lesser and lesser representation, and that's why there is a need for caste census. So this is, for instance, around 10 jatis are there, meaning about 60 jatis, 66 jatis information is not available in this data source, because the data is not about considering all the caste in the survey. So if we look at the subcaste level analysis, and if we look at compare non-SCs with these three groups, Adi Dravida, Devendra Kula Velalar, and Arundhatiyar, what we this is the older age cohort, the oldest age cohort, and what we find is that significant differences across these jatis. So that is the Arundhatiyars, about 85% were illiterate in the older group. 42 and 45% of Adi Dravidar and Devendra Kulavelalar are illiterate. And this is still much higher than this 27% of the non-Dalits. And again, when we look at higher education, there's only 0.3% of Arundhatiyars had any kind of graduation, also 12th standard and above, compared to 6.5 and 4.5, and non-Dalits had anyway much higher achievements in the greater than equal to 2. The dissimilarities of each of these subgroups with the non-Dalits, when we look at it, Arundhatiyar's dissimilarities is shockingly high of 57.5%, meaning 57% of the population have to be rearranged to get somewhat equal kind of to appear like non-Dalit. That is as if there are two different sets of people living in the same state. So when people say look at other states which are better, it's like telling that for certain people within that so-called better state, the life is almost like people belonging to the states which have achieved much lesser developmental outcomes. So what happened to the middle-age cohort? And then when the middle-age cohort, if you look at, which didn't have much higher improvements, again we see these differences continuing. Even in the 34 to 49 age group, about 64% Arundhatiars have illiterate compared to 34 and 35 of Adi Dravidar and Devendra Kulavelalar, and only 17% for the non-Dalits. Similarly, greater than equal to 12, 19% is the non-Dalit achievements compared to 9, 6, and 3.42 for the Devendra Kulavelalar, Adi Dravidar, and Arundhatiya respectively. So what is happening in the last? So this is younger cohort. Sorry for all those mistakes. So this is the youngest cohort. But even within the youngest cohort, 18 to 33, if we look at Arundhatiyas, there are still 17% who are not educated compared to the overall 2% of the non-Dalits. And even the other Dalit groups have been able to make much better improvements, but the levels of achievements of Arundhatiyas needs some serious attention. And again, they are overrepresented in the 1 to 4 and 5 to 7 categories, but then later and underrepresented in the better educated category. So again, as I mentioned, now the concern is about greater than equal to 12 for the younger cohort. But for Arundhatiyas, it's not only the higher education, but there are even other levels that is of concern. So only 17% of Arundhatiyas had greater than equal to 12 compared to 44% in the non-Dalit group. So what we see is that this and still like 36.3% is a very high dissimilarity in the index. At least in terms of achievement, Devendra Kulavelalar and Adi Dravidar seem to have got somewhat better outcomes in the over years. So what we can infer from education is that there is so basically people who were born in the 1980s, they have got the youngest group, they have got a lot of education compared to the previous two generations. And in these younger groups, but what has happened is that the relative mobility or relative disparity of SCs persist across these age cohorts, and differences across gender is reducing, but caste difference persists, and dissimilarities much lesser when it comes to illiteracy. But now, though it is high among Dalit women and particularly Arundhatiya women, and but the nature of educational inequality has changed differently for over these three age cohorts. So this is what I have with regard to education. How am I doing on time? Can I continue for another 15 minutes or so? Or is that
Yes, I think 10-15 minutes you can continue because we'll have the discussant also come over and exchange some ideas. So,
fine, fine.
yes.
Yeah, so let me like now move on to occupation. And again, so what I have done is occupation is slightly more difficult in categorizing, but what I have done is categorized the occupations as say small farmers and agriculturalist, and then there is manual laborer who are these wage workers, and even the other manual laborer who are more industrial workers. I call them skilled laborer, and this is semi and unskilled laborer, though they may not be the. This is how sociologists use. So I'm going by that. Then there is petty business who are like home-based workers, but they have something to on their own. And professionals uh, are the people who are into white collar work. And then there is again high professionals and professionals. For women, I add homemaker as a status category as one thing that is changing across in Tamil Nadu is that there is a reduction of working women compared to older generations. And again, there is all this news of women in factory and all, there is slightly a higher number than other places, but still there is a significant number of people who have moved out of manual labor and have become homemakers. So I want to look at, when I look at women, I'm adding homemaker as a status category to understand mobility. So what do we observe and look at men and women differently? So what do we see over the three age cohorts? And so the blue one is the older age, green is middle age, and this somewhat orange is the younger age. So what do we see is that one thing that is clear is that agriculturalists, they are coming down. And that is what I kept telling about the structural transformation, where previously the older age group 30% were farmers, and then which is come down to 7%. Business, there is not much change. Professional is not very slight change. And a significant chunk are in the semi and unskilled manual workers. And then this is not the industrial worker. The skilled manual worker is the more industrial worker. So when there was a reduction from agriculture from the older to middle generation, more people became unskilled workers. But in the second phase, there seems to be somewhat increase in the industrial worker. So there is some 28% who have become industrial workers now compared to 14. So there is reduction from agriculture, but younger generation, there is much more industrial work that is happening in the cohorts. Now, if you look at differences between Dalits and non-Dalits, again within men, again what we see is that this is the oldest group which had much more farmers in the non-Dalit category, and which was much lesser in other categories. Again, what we see is that for the oldest group, about 85%, the oldest generation, if we were to say, 85% of the men who were working as, in Arundhati men, were working as semi and unskilled manual laborer. And this was about 75 for Devendra Kulavelalar and 64 for Adi Dravida. And compared to non-Dalits, which is only about 34%. Right? So again, we see that in the older group, there was huge differences between what kind of occupations men engaged in. Then we move forward to the middle generation, which is somewhat different, but we saw some improvements in education. But what we observe is there is not much change in the occupation category, where we see that still 86% of Arundhati men worked as semi and unskilled manual laborer, and, and 73% and 73% were working as semi of Devendra Kulavelalar were working as semi and unskilled manual laborer, and 67% were working as semi of Adi Dravidas were still working as semi and unskilled manual labor. In this due course, non-Dalit also from 35, about 5% more entered into unskilled, semi and unskilled labor, but about 9% more also got involved in skilled manual labor. So agriculture is declining. So everybody is becoming some kind of worker that is there. And because the professionals is not increasing much, everybody is becoming some kind of worker, but the disparities, so there is a larger job crisis, but along with that, what we see is this significant differences between what kind of work men are doing. And these dissimilarities are much higher than the dissimilarities in education, which means that even among well-educated Dalits, there are going to be people who are working, much more working in semi and unskilled manual labor. So if you see, and the decline is also very low. So it's Arundhati dissimilarity is about 50, which comes down to 46. Devendra Kulavelalar's 41 comes down to 33, and 29 comes down to 26.5. So what the education differences, there were something positive, but not so much in the occupation. One of the good things that is there is at least this professional sector seems to have some kind of representation, which is almost equal across Dalit groups and not so very different from the non-Dalits. But the proportion of these jobs itself is very low. So let's look at what happened from the younger to the middle to the younger generation. So again, what we see is that I mentioned for there is farming further went down from 21, so non-Dalits 10% it became. All others also there is a reduction in farming. Then the professionals again, because of education, some of the Dalit groups have got some better achievements. Particularly Devendra Kulavelala seems to have significant proportions of as professionalism. But the disparities with semi and unskilled manual labor, that seems to persist. And now, even now, among men, about Arundhatiyar men, 80%, which is a very high number, I would say, are still engaged in semi and unskilled manual labor compared to just say 40% for the non-Dalit. And again, there is some reduction in Adi Dravidar and Devendra Kulavelala, and these differences are somewhat encouraging. But what we observe is that if once we put it as a relative mobility point of view, then we see that the gaps between Dalits and non-Dalits is still persisting over time across various indices. Now, one of the interesting things that happened was with women, where once you put in homemaker as a category, we find something very different. What we find is that not a linear decline or increase in categories. What we find is that whereas the older category, older age groups, where there was a high proportion of homemaker, which went down in the middle age, but once again went almost back to the older age group in homemaker category. And this is something which some of the commentators have looked at using village level studies, but the large scale data also seems to suggest the same. And almost this is complete. This change is being compensated in the semi and unskilled manual worker, where previously about 19% of women were working as semi and unskilled manual labor in the oldest generation. The middle generation it increased to 28, and the younger generation it went down to around 16. So once again, if we look at differences between Dalit and non-Dalit women, what we find is two things. One is that, like men, in women also there is a over-representation of Dalit in semi and unskilled manual labor, whereas only 12.6% of women were working as unskilled manual worker. 57% of Arundhatiyar women were working as semi and unskilled manual labor, and Adi Dravidas and Devendra Kulavelalas about 35, 33 and 37% were working as semi and unskilled manual labor. And this also meant that more non-Dalits, about 80% non-Dalit women, were there as homemakers compared to others who were much lesser homemakers. Now, from these patterns remain the same with the middle generation too. From the older to middle generation, we almost see somewhat similar status quo. And again, they are all like, it's like caste determines a very different kind of life chances. And we can see that particular, so the distinct difference, dissimilarity indices, which kind of indicate what is the distinct difference between an Arundhatiyar and non-Dalit, and Devendra Kulavelalar and non-Dalit, and Adi Dravidar and non-Dalit. These indices seem to be high, and in between middle age groups, it did go up too. But what we find as the final transition from the middle age to the young women is that there is some kind of convergence that is happening between the in the homemaker category for Dalit women and non-Dalit women. Now, in the middle age category, whereas 43% of Adi Dravida and 34 and 33% of Devendra Kulavelal and Arundhatiyar were homemakers. In the younger age cohort, this number has gone up to 64, 61, and 57. And these are much closer to the 79% of the non-Dalit women. So this has meant the dissimilarities have come down, even though substantial. And where is this coming from? This has been coming from withdrawal from the semi and unskilled manual worker category. Whereas that went down from 18 to 10% for the non-Dalits. For each of the Dalit groups, we see substantial decline in working in semi and unskilled manual worker. This is probably due to the fact that the women are more educated, and households have been out of abject poverty, not like happily living ever after, but abject poverty is not there. But that has meant, and some kind of conservative cultural values may have also creeped in. Certain literature seems to suggest, which seems to make women coming back more to the home and out of the workforce. Again, there are debates on whether this is a positive thing or negative thing, but what we see is that this trajectory is clearly evident, where in the man in for the men it was shift from semi-skilled to skilled, which is industrial labor, but here the shift is from semi-skilled to home, and that is the difference that we observe in occupation for when it comes to women. So what we observe as a summary on occupation is consistent decline from agriculture and slow increase in skilled labor for men, increase and then decrease of semi-skilled labor among women, high increase in the homemaker category in the youngest group, mobility in Dalit youth men out of semi and unskilled labor, very mild, but still higher chance than, still they are likely to be is unskilled labor much more than non-Dalits, because there is not much economy as a whole also hasn't generated enough skilled labor employment. Dalit women who were typically less likely to be homemakers, now they were more likely to be unskilled employment. And that was the case always, but now these things are slightly, this is converging, where more Dalit women are becoming homemakers and less in the unskilled labor. So that is something that is happening with regard to occupation. So, in terms of broader conclusion, what I emphasize is that in an economy which seems to have gone through structural change, it is important to measure relative mobility, not saying that people are educated, this much proportion are educated, but compare the levels of education between Dalits and non-Dalits. So, and how that is changing, and that gaps, have they come down substantially, and why do these gaps persist is a altogether different question. In this part, what I seem to find is that significant educational gaps persist, and again now the disparities in education are more in the top and less in the illiterate category. And in an economy which is going to reward only the highest education, just being educated doesn't make much of a difference. And so the the human capital focus has to be towards getting better education to the top, and the current privatization and all, it can make things further problematic. In particular, Arundhatiyar seem to be lagging behind in higher education, showing mild signs of upward mobility. And in this case, at least, the subclassification reservation seems to be a reasonable decision. We need to see what it has done with maybe later years of data. The occupational caste linkage is reducing much slower, because there is very few good quality jobs that are being created. And this other thing of women becoming more homemakers, which is a trend across all women, but much more we observe among Dalit women. That is something, the reduced female LFPR debate doesn't take it, it assumes as if every woman is leaving out of the labor force, but this seems to be a much larger problem with Dalit women, and that seems to means we need to probably engage with it in a different way than as a general female LFPR reduction. So there are few methodological challenges in this. Like, one is, because of lack of caste census, this reweighting of data is a bit of a problem. The proportion of Dalits seem to be higher in the current sample. Now, to reweigh, we need to know what is the exact proportion of other groups, and that we don't have a caste census. So we need to have some kind of census which gets jati level information. And the other thing is that, yeah, within this data, it is very difficult to figure out all the channels and pathways. And I think some kind of primary survey, some of the work I am doing, is probably going to throw light on certain, at least in those specific locations. So, yeah, these are the findings I wanted to share. Yeah, so
Thank you
I
so
can
much,
take
Professor
questions. Yeah,
Ranganathan, for such a
yeah.
comprehensive analysis. I now invite our discussant, Dr. Libitha, to share her views and also pose questions that she has about the lecture. Thank you.
Yeah, I was supposed to share this PPT with Libitha long ago, but I didn't do that. So I'm telling that beforehand. So, but anyways, hopefully the presentation was clear enough. So Libitha, you can give your comments with whatever I told. Yeah.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer of the Speaking from the Margin academic lecture series for inviting me to discuss this paper by Professor Thiagu on social mobility of Dalits in Tamil Nadu. As we heard about that, the paper addresses a significant questions in the Indian context, whether the education and occupational mobility may lead to historically, economically marginalized communities, SE and non-SEs, SESTs. Particularly, this paper is looking at SE to be to non-SEs in Tamil Nadu. As throughout the lecture, we can hear, conclude that education has, we know, that long history of in important pathways of social mobility in India, especially the four communities that belong to historically and economically weaker sections in, because they are aware from resources and opportunity from the mainstream of the society. So, in this context, this specific paper is, leads to, giving us some kind such of, informations and some kind of interesting, in the literature. So I find that, like overall, we got to know about all the notion. My small suggestions, because we were working, Sarah and me was working quite 3 months for this project. So it was very interesting to see again my paper. Okay, our paper is discussing and it is, come to different. So the thing is that we try to be the overall. The problem is that the data series like IHDS and CPHS, it is quite older data, but at the same time the village level are also helping us to understand and how it is different education and occupational mobility of SE and the non-SE communities. So this is I felt like that mobility, some kind of measurement issues, like we are using the dissimilarity index even though, but and one thing, it is age cohort aligned, but it's the children's are something, the gap is, we are taking 6 to 25, but if you consider the age between 25 to up to 35, the age group belong to this schooling time, it will be a bit better. And also the capital control variables like factors like low urban has we are showing that, but in parental education also, you are trying to say that in intergenerational mobility also look at, but if you could look at Indra, it is the village study, it will be a better, we will get the 3 generations of a parental informations on education and occupational mobility. And also I felt like that the thing, the even though the limitation, it is very good to be as village kind of study, it is irrelevant to the social science research. I'm very happy to being as a discussant for this paper on the social mobility Dalits in Tamil Nadu. Thank you so much for inviting. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Professor Ranganathan, you can please respond. Yes.
Yeah, one of the concern is this age cohort. What is the age cohort? How do we ideally look at? So one idea I thought was maybe to look at 15 to 29. That is how youth is defined. So maybe look at 15 to 29, then 30 to 44 would be the previous generation youth, and 45 to 59 would be the oldest youth in some ways like that. Then one issue there is that 15 means they can't study more than 10th standard. So then I thought, okay, maybe we will shift it further. So that is where 18 I put. And yeah, but if you have to look at degree only as a thing, then it will get even further. So yeah, so that is one issue. And this intergenerational, the main issue with intergenerational is that women's parents are not in the home. So the many women. So then except those women who are unmarried up to a particular age, then we get their father's education for comparison. But so most studies now there are few studies on mother daughter, but that is a concern which drove me to put this age cohort rather than, because what is happening to women, Dalit women, there is much lesser idea rather than the studies of mobility have always focused on father son. So that's where I wanted to do this. Yeah, the village studies, yeah, we need to see. That is something I'm working. Let's see what we find from there. Some data I've collected there. So what we did in that data collection was we asked, even if there is a woman in the household, we asked their parents' education, if even if they are staying outside. So that way, maybe intergenerational mother's daughter also we can see in that data maybe.
Yes. Now I'll open the floor for questions. If any of the participants have questions, they can either raise their hands or type it in the chat box, and we can take it further from there. Yes. Yes, Ganesh, please go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Surya and Professor Ranganathan for this wonderful lecture, particularly bringing this quantitative data, I can say. And my query is something beyond that, since I'm not trained in the quantitative data, but I was tried to make some sense how the social mobility as a category that is very much showed up in your presentation in a very tangible form, which we can visible or we can visualize. But my questions are something that this is not a kind of questions, but something that coming in my mind, like when we are talking about this tangible growth and the tangible upliftment, we can say that you are showing. So what about something like the other category, like called dignity, or because as in particularly in the higher educations or in educations also, this debate is going on around since we have achieved the economic mobility, but there is very difficult to achieve the social mobility that you are saying. But what about this social dignity, from which we often get the humiliation and something like that way? So how can we correlate this kind of economic mobility with this, I can say, as in social upliftment or the social dignity within the educational spaces or the other spaces that you are showing also in the everyday life, like the occupations in the spaces? So how can we correlate or something like that way? I was thinking. Yeah, thank you so much. I think I
Yeah,
would make
that's a very
yeah.
important question. So one thing is that so why this is see the idea with particularly with Tamil Nadu is that the understanding is that, oh, the only dignity is the problem, as if that I understand that there is a problem related to dignity, but it is kind of sometimes put as if that, oh, we have achieved equal terms in all other things, right? That is the understanding that outsiders of Tamil Nadu have at least. But this, what I wanted to show was or look at was also, is that the case? Like even getting into 12th standard, if there are going to be such differences, then how do we, like, yeah, there is that other struggle, both have to be simultaneous, but even this there is gaps. That is what I wanted to see, if there is gaps. And what I find is that significant gaps still are there, like getting a job and unskilled labor, predominance by Dalits, and all are still continuing. So that is what I wanted to check. There is this concern of dignity and struggles within these academic spaces. That is also that is another important thing. And one other thing in Tamil Nadu, which is specific, is this violence, this increasing violence now. And now people are linking that to mobility also. Like say, last few years back, 2 years back, this one student, some 11th standard students went and uh, cut the arm of another student because that student was Dalit and was doing well in school. That was the only crime that that student was doing well. And the issue was, how can you do so well? How can teachers show so much goodness to you? So this, I think that violence comes from understanding of hierarchy and dignity and all these aspects. So I think both are but I am also saying this material interest or material outcomes also matter. It is not a, and the understanding, okay, material outcomes, Tamil Nadu is being equal, is the typical understanding. So, but there also these disparities persist is what I wanted to highlight. Obviously, these concerns, and particularly Tamil Nadu, for some reason, has a big violence concern.
Mr. Manmohan, I think he has raised his hand. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Vidyasagar. So, sir, my question is related to that social mobility. Government has also doing their initiative to complete, and that means for that mobility. So, number one, government had initiated that reservation policy, and that is also provided to the SC/ST. So this is the number one thing. And second one thing, government has also launched some of the scheme as midday meal scheme or PM Awas Yojana. So I would like to know your perspective related to these things, related to these schemes. How much is it beneficial for that social mobility thing? And second one thing, that what is your perspective, what is your take on related to the things that which will be implemented in a more better way for this social mobility things? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Manmohan. Good to see you here. Like after the executive program, we are meeting in this. That's good. So one thing is that, see, that is I did give other kind of background. One is that, see, this all these schemes that you are mentioning are all addressing the primary education and maybe secondary education to some extent. The and reservations, when you say, it's only in government institutions. And Tamil Nadu is a place where education is becoming, and gradually, or not even gradually, rapidly, it is privatizing. So that is where the difference beyond 12th standard, when we see, that is somewhat indicating that there is lack of reservation, and also the fee and other things in private is also very different. So that's where the difference in primary and illiterate seems to have come down, right? That too, still there are Arundhadyas where there is about 18% who are illiterate, but other caste groups at least have reduced. But so these are government's actual involvement. But in the post 12th standard, government is getting lesser and lesser involved. And when it is lesser and lesser involved, and there is no reservation in private colleges and all, so that is that is going to make these differences further, is my reading. So so that's what, so the that is again, like, if we have all those schemes, are it, is it enough? Now that is where there are people asking for reservation in private institutions also. And that comes, and this data seems to lend support to such demands, right? Why is there so much disparities beyond that level? And if only very small government institutes are there, then maybe that is other demand. That seems a reasonable demand if you look at these disparities persisting.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes.
Okay.
Theo has also raised his hand. Yes, please go ahead with your question.
So thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, sir. Thank you for a wonderful clarity about the women, Dalit women and men, all those things. My question is, in the present context, Karnataka you are aware, people are, especially Dalit people, are against the subclassification. In Tamil Nadu as well, so though some people endorse that particular categorization, but after Andhra's subclassification among Dalits, Arundhatiya, Devendra Kulavelalar and Paraya. So in this scenario, your presentation endorses this particular categorization for the betterment, or we have to see collectively Dalits, and then we should go for policies and schemes to enhance them.
Yeah, so this
Thank you.
idea, thank you, Theo. This is an important question, and part of why I wanted to look at Jati level analysis was this. So there are a few aspects. Like one is that here the disparities are existing. That there is no denial. I don't think even those who are against subclassification, they are not saying that disparities do not exist. I think very much people are aware of the disparity. Now the question is this the only way we can resolve these disparities? That is where some kind of contention seems to be coming. So let's say, I think in this context, say if this degree and whether if in this way of implementing reservation, the other subcaste lose out their seats to so if you look at the disparities, you still see that Dalit non-Dalit disparity, even with Adi Dravida and Devendra Kulavelalar, is still prominent. That is not gone away. And particularly, one thing is with occupation, those disparities are much higher. So education, things have got much better for Adi Dravida, Devendra Kulavelalar, but still after getting educated, most of them are in unskilled labor. So that is where the contention is coming. If are they going to lose out because of the reservation? That is one. And is subclassification the only way to go ahead with that? I think it is a reasonable move in the Tamil Nadu context. Whatever was done was a reasonable move, and people have also. I think most of the parties at least seem to have said it is okay. Only some queries that are being raised are related to implementation where there is some kind of lacunae they are saying. This is about the mobility part. The one other question which in the end you asked was about that is more important is the political part of. Now, what does this mean to political consolidation of or political feeling of Dalit unity? And that is where there are concerns like what this can do to political unity, and that is these two are very different concerns. So once you put this subclassification and the reasons for subclassification, like the court was saying, was about as if Dalits are discriminating other Dalits and all. In Tamil Nadu case, most of the Dalits are separate live in separate regions, like in geographically also. There is some kind of hierarchy within Dalits also, but it is about how the intermediate caste has shown domination that has affected mobility more than within Dalit any discrimination happening. So the reasons that the judgment told were all a bit problematic. Otherwise, I don't think anybody is not wanting these disparities to reduce, is my reading. Is that okay? Or, yeah,
Thank you very much, sir.
yeah.
Sanatan has raised his hand or her hand, I think. You may ask your question.
Hello. Hello. Am I
Yeah.
audible?
Yes, you are audible. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, sir, for the insightful lectures. As you discussed the social mobility through the economic and educational mobility by focusing on the age cohort, right?
Yes.
But my question is a little bit different from the discussion. As you know, the renowned sociologist M.N. Srinivas studies the Kurk society and developed the concept of Sanskritization. According to these concepts, lower caste groups or Dalits attempts to improve their social status and the social mobility by adopting the lifestyle, cultural practices, traditions, rituals, behavioral pattern of the higher caste peoples. Through this process, Dalits have attempt to transfer their way of life in order to gain social recognition, as Ganesh say, also the social dignity. This process generally fosters the upward social mobility, but such mobility is largely based on the positional rather than the structural. Right. In this context, my question is how Sanskritization has influenced the life of Dalit, and how does it foster them upward social mobility in recent time, particularly in the southern regions? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Sanathan. So, very interesting name. So, yeah, no, this is, see, one thing is that this Sanskritization that Srinivas mentions, I think at some point he also mentions that Sanskritization doesn't apply to Dalits. In a sense, like or this adopting upper caste practices and moving is more applicable to intermediate castes, or say those who are maybe closer to the upper caste. But it is very difficult. Whatever uh, Dalits can do, the society will not, this kind of Sanskritization is never going to give them upward mobility. So the top and bottom in the caste system work very differently. For them, in between, there is some flexibility, but for the top and bottom, there is no Sanskritization. For top and bottom, the rules are different. For the bottom, there is no possibility of Sanskritization giving mobility. There is some imitation that happens with these Brahminical ideas. That is because they're part of the larger society. But that will never give any kind of upward mobility to the Dalits. Just because Dalits doesn't say some Dalits stop eating non-veg, it's not that they'll be treated with minimal extra respect. That doesn't apply to Dalits. Only in the intermediate, some people say if they become vegetarian, they may be treated slightly better. And that is what is seen in Tamil Nadu also. Like there is uh, no amount of, I don't think anybody plans for Sanskritization because that's not a realistic way of moving upward. Is that okay? Like, I don't think that works for the Dalit. And Srinivas also mentions that it doesn't work for the Dalit that you adopt certain practices, you will be given respect. You may adopt, but you will not get mobility through that. That is why people go to Buddhism or Christianity or Islam, whatever. But within Hindu fold, Dalit can't get upward mobility through within the Hindu religion. Capitalism can still provide something. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir.
The RM username RM, if they have raised their hands, yes, you may please go ahead.
Is it audible? Audible, yeah. So
Yeah.
I had a couple of questions on things that you had sort of briefly touched upon, I think, when you were talking. One was like how useful are sort of thresholds like 10th pass or 12th pass, in the sense that in what sort of institutions do these markers actually make sense or are an accurate indicator of, say, education and literacy? And sort of in addition to that, something you also mentioned, I think, is in an economy where sort of specialization is becoming the norm, basically, right? If you want any decent or meaningful opportunity of employment, how much does a change in basic literacy actually translate to significant economic opportunities? That is not to say it does not matter at all, but in terms of like mobility. The context being like I was teaching in an aided college in Orissa for a few months.
Okay.
So it has +2 and it has UG. So I was teaching English, and even in UG first year, second year, even third year, students do not have a good grasp over the basics. And now that the education system is sort of churning out people, is it actually a significant sort of data point in terms of education?
Yeah, these are like some questions, at least I'll attempt. So one is that this distinction that I am drawing on 7th standard and all that is that the schools, the way they are built in Tamil Nadu is typically there is primary school, middle school, and then there are secondary schools and so on. So then one is like, if at all, sometimes the breaks happen because the school nearest to the village has only till say 8th standard. There are some schools like that. So some of the breaks are okay like that. Yeah, but say now then the question comes, do we have to distinguish between 1 to 4 and 5 to 7 then? Because there are very few schools which are now only 1 to 5 or anything like that. So yeah, that is, I think that is a good point. We can take that as a, so maybe I can look at lesser categories and see if the difference is there. Huh? So degree becomes A, but then the degree also there is gap. Huh? I understand the learning outcome part, but even the basic one purpose it does serve is the signaling part. One is learning part, the other is the signaling part. That at least education at certain level seems to be serving. So that is where maybe we can look into that. What do you think? Well, my guess is the signaling part, that if you are a graduate, there is some signaling you carry. I know it doesn't say a certain thing about learning outcome, but that
Yeah,
matters,
of
right?
course. No, I was just
Uh,
like
uh,
wondering
uh,
whether it actually obscures the
yeah,
situation.
the in between classes you are saying, and but yeah, mostly. So, but this one problem I keep hearing is women getting out in 8th standard and 10th standard, these junctures also. So the education. So I was also checking if there were these discrepancies. Like, is there a more women dropouts around 8th standard, around 10th standard, particularly the school distance and hostel can also play a role. So that I was looking at, I didn't find much, but again, if we were to look at regions with some kind of hostels and no hostels, and looking deeper, maybe that is from the field. I keep hearing these things that after a point, is this infrastructure is not complete, so there are certain concerns regarding that.
Yeah, that exists in Orissa also, actually.
Yeah. So that way these levels matter, and signaling way it matters. Yeah, in terms of learning outcomes, yeah, there are bigger concerns. So
Yeah, it's a bit scary.
yeah,
Apart
yeah,
from that, I had one more question, if you
huh,
don't mind.
yeah,
So
yeah.
now I'm teaching at a sort of government university right now in Orissa. In the in the second year, they have a course that they've introduced now called community engagement, which nobody really takes seriously. It's supposed to be like the students need to go to a village or some nearby area and do a project, and they have to produce some project. So mostly it's taken as a pointless thing, but it feels like there's a lot of potential you can do in terms of actually doing field study or encouraging the students to develop some sort of research abilities or to even understand what's happening on the ground. So I
Okay.
am teaching English. It's not like a social sciences department, but still I feel like it seems like an interesting possibility to make something out of it. So, like, would you have any advice or recommendations or something?
This is what UG students.
Yeah, UG
Oh,
second year.
okay, okay. No, so we have some things for the PhD students. We do something. But these are good, yeah, but the time allotted, do they have time for this? Like, is there a special time, or is it along
Like
with
they
all
have
other
daily
courses?
45 minutes, but
Okay, okay. Yeah, time becomes a big thing. That is what I find in most of these field things. Time and some kind of
yeah,
resources they need to have. But yeah, it's a good initiative. So this is what part of NEP, or I just
I think it's NEP because it's in the
okay,
new
okay,
NEP
okay,
sort of.
okay.
Yeah,
I think maybe use, like, we'll talk about this somewhere later, maybe. So I can share my
yeah,
number. That's okay. But yeah,
yeah. Okay, fine.
yeah. Okay.
There's
Yeah.
there's one last question we'll take. It's in the chat box.
Huh.
They're asking, sir, in Tamil Nadu and India also, the caste hierarchical mindset and discrimination is increasing among young adults. What is your views and solutions for this? It's
At
very
least Tamil Nadu, yeah, India, I cannot tell so much. But in Tamil Nadu, there are a lot of things that has been suggested, because it's a bigger problem in Tamil Nadu, where and there is some committee also they set up to figure out, particularly school age children. They have these caste markers, and so there is this practice of having these caste markers, and going to schools with those markers, and that has been a concern. Some suggestions have been told, but the main issue is the politicians actively being well, there is no anti-caste initiative, so that's what the Tamil Nadu has very little anti-caste impetus from the state, though it is perceived as a thing. the so many instances there is also even acts against violence, acts of violence go less punished or unpunished. So when such a thing happens, then it's very difficult to tell people not to have. So there are two levels. One is with the Dalit, non-Dalit is the larger problem. Within non-Dalit, there are not so much tensions we observe. The Dalit, non-Dalit problem is very high in Tamil Nadu. I don't know what is the specific here, but at least some of the problems when it happens, state has to punish in proper ways. Minimum, that is the minimal, not so last 2 days back there was a custodial death of a Dalit, and that nothing has happened. Nobody is talking about it, and not the state chief minister doesn't tell much. So these kind of issues, because they are part of some caste organization, the so it's so ingrained through politics. So it's very difficult to have some kind of anti-caste from the state itself. Yeah. Yeah, anyway, Setu, I can discuss more, but so that there are two kinds of problems. Maybe if I want to expand more, one is this kind of no anti-caste thing, and there is one other kind of caste denial from that is also a problem. Like, so if we start addressing caste, then we will become casteist. It is identity politics. That kind of a problem is also there. So both these ideologies are quite strong. One is very casteist ideology. One is to say ignoring caste is the best way to deal with caste. There is very small merit in that, but then it becomes very difficult for the Dalit issues to come up because of both these problems together. Yeah.
Yes, I'll now invite Vijay to give vote of thanks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Shaurya. Am I audible? Thank you, Shaurya. As we conclude this season of the Academic Discussion Series 2026, I am honored to give the vote of thanks on behalf of speaking from margin. First and foremost, we express our deepest gratitude to Professor Thiagu Ranganathan. We are equally grateful to Dr. Libitha. Thank you for bringing your academic rigor and unique perspective as an economist to this discussion. A sincere thanks to you all, the participants who joined us today. Your presence and engagement are what makes this discussion truly impactful. We are looking forward to see you at our next session. This online talk will be available on YouTube as well. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay,
Thank you, Professor Raghunath. And thank you,
Now-
Libitha. Yes.
Yeah.
Hope
thank
to
you
see you
so
soon. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Professor. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Pleasant evening. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank